مش مشكلة إن شاء الله. يس.
طيب، إذا بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. ندوات إعادة كتابة التراث في العالم العربي بدأناها في الندوة الأولى حول بدأنا ندوات مشروع إعادة كتابة التراث في العالم العربي بالندوة الأولى الأسبوع منذ أسبوعين حول تاريخ العرب عن طريق النقوش. سيمينار بروجكت رايتينج هيريتاج إن العرب وورلد. هذه الندوة الثانية سيكون سيمينار سوف تكون بعنوان المحاضرة يكون بعنوان تأهيل المدن التراثية أسس التصنيف أو التنميط وملاحظات حول المنهجية. إذا سأحاول، أنا لغتي فرنسي لكن سأحاول التحدث بالإنجليزي لأنه أغلبية يتحدث بالإنجليزي. Rehabilitation of Medina, Principles of Typological Theory and Methodological Notes. المحاضر سوف يكون بروفيسور اتيلوبتروشيولى، architect landscaper expert in conservation، وسوف يكون الدكتور بوضياف موديراتور يدير الجلسة architect urban designer، وسوف أشرف هذا السالم مهندس هذا السالم على المحاضرة. We welcome the attendees، نرحب بكل الحضور. I warmly thank the Professor Attilio for this participation in our project and for his response to our invitation. I thank also Dr. Boudiaf for accepting the moderator of the seminar. I will present Dr. Boudiaf's card and he will present the lecturer's card. طيب، سأحاول الآن مشاركة نحاول أن نفتح مشاركات البطاقات. أسمحكم في بعض الثواني لأشارك من كمبيوتر آخر ليس الكمبيوتر الذي أضع منه الفيديو. الندوة الثانية تأهيل المدن التراثية التصنيف والمنهجية. إدارة النقاش سوف تكون من طرف الدكتور بوضياف. Moderator will be by Dr. Bوضياف. الدكتور بوضياف PhD in Architectural Design, Magister in Urban Design. He was directeur des études à l'époque entre 93 et 98. Rapporteur de la Commission nationale refonte des programmes pédagogiques, architecture et technologie. كان مدير للدراسات في ليبو في الجزائر، مدرسة البوليتكنيك في الجزائر بين 92 و 98، والمقرر اللجنة الوطنية لإعادة البرنامج البيداغوجي للعمارة في الجزائر. في 94 إلى 96، وكان منسق مصادقة برنامج العمارة في الاتحاد الدولي للمعماريين، coordinateur de la validation des programmes d'architecture auprès de l'Union internationale des architectes entre 2018 et 2020. إذا أترك الكلمة للدكتور بوضياف ليقوم بإدارة الندوات. تفضل دكتور.
شكرا أستاذ هادف. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين. Let me first, on behalf of all of you, thanks Professor Attilio for accepting our invitation, and he will be with us presenting his first paper dealing on the rehabilitations of the Medina. Before giving him the floor, let me just give you a very brief description of Professor Attilio. Professor Attilio is an architect landscaper. He had been graduated in 1970 from the university in Italy, and then in 1980 he focused on the Oriental studies, and he got a degree from the University of Venice. After that, he moved to different countries where he worked in Algeria, Libya, Egypt, Palestine. He was also expert as in Saudi Arabia and in Syria, and he was also the chief editor of Environmental Design, the journal of the Islamic Environmental Design Research. And he also was a professor from 1913 to 1917 in the University of Qatar University. He is a former Aga Khan professor of Islamic Societies at MIT and director of the Aga Khan program at MIT and Harvard University from 94 to 98. And he also published around 34 books, more than 210 articles dealing mainly with the Oriental studies, and he is now the director of we call it the Center of Studies for the Oriental Center of Oriental Studies in Italy. Shall I translate this also in Arabic?
باختصار إذا سمحت، يعني باختصار شديد.
باسمكم جميعا أشكر الدكتور البروفيسور اتيليو بتروشيولي. البروفيسور اتيليو بتروشيولي خريج جامعة روما لا سبينزا في سنة 1970، وبعدها ركز بحوثه حول الدراسات حول في المشرق والعالم الإسلامي بصفة عامة، وحصل على الدكتوراه في 1980. كان درس في عدة قسم الهندسة المعمارية في جامعة مدرسة البوليتكنيك اللي تابعة لجامعة باري بإيطاليا، وكذلك درس في جامعة القطر، ودرس فيما بعد التدرج في الجزائر، وكان كذلك خبير في مخصوص ترميم عدة مباني في عدة دول من بينها الجزائر، ليبيا، مصر، فلسطين، سوريا والسعودية. وكذلك كان هو المدير السابق لبرنامج آغا خان بالMIT والهارفارد من سنة 74 إلى سنة 78. لديه عدة كتب، حوالي 34 كتاب، وآخر كتاب هو After Amnesia. ولديه أكثر من 210 مقال حول كلها تدور حول الدراسات في المشرق والعالم الإسلامي. هذه بصفات جد مختصرة. نبدأ على البروفيسور اتيلو. Well, as I said, the intervention of the professor will be dealing on the rehabilitations of the Medinas, principles of typological theories, and methodological notes. So, if you got to complete something, Professor, about you, the brief presentation that I did, the floor is yours, and I do apologize in advance if I missed something important that you had been in your career.
No, absolutely. It was very, very complete. Thank you very much. Very kind and very sweet presentation. I want to thank you and all the organization and Mr. Salem for the invitation, because it gives me an interesting opportunity to present the work, not only my present work, my personal work, but also the work of a school, which is the school founded by Saverio Muratori, that we call the typological school, the Italian typological school, if you want. How do we proceed? I say 2-3 sentences and then you translate, or you resume?
Well, we've got 40 minutes for your presentation. So I will leave this up to you. Once you will want me to translate, in this case, you'll stop and I will do it. Or I leave this to you. I will do my best, and I do apologize also in advance if the translation won't be, let's say, exactly of what you are going to say.
No. Well, you will.
And I guess that most of the auditory they can speak and understand English in this case, so they might intervene at the end or during the presentation if something is really, let's say, misleading or the opposite of what you will want to say.
Thank you very much. So it's a great occasion for me to present this theory of Saverio Muratori, to which all of us of the school we have contributed with our experience, and we have developed in part the theory. Of course, we have expanded the field of application. I moved to the Islamic world, for instance, and so on and so forth. Another character of this presentation is that in my career I paid more attention to the urban fabric than to the monuments. Of course, the monuments are part of the urban fabric, but I see them, and I will see also today them, as component part of the general urban fabric. For two reasons, you know, the fabric is where the people really live, where they pay their, also they suffer, where they spend most of their life. That, in that sense, is more important for me. And the second reason is also that in terms of quantity, within the city, the quantity of the urban fabric, the houses and the residences, is overwhelming the rest of the buildings. Do I go on?
Let me translate this. أولا أشكر الأستاذ هادف سالم على هذه الدعوة، منحت لي الفرصة أن أتطرق إلى المدرسة الإيطالية الذي وراها موراتوري، كانيجا ايمونينو. هذا اللي تكون المدرسة فيما يخص العلاقة ما بين نمط البناية والنسيج العمراني. The relation between the building typology and the urban morphology. And في البداية كنت مهتم أكثر فيما يخص النسيج العمراني بدلا من البناية كبناية as monument. هذول يعني بعدين بالطبع في علاقة وثيقة ما بيناتهم، كانت التطرق الأول للنسيج العمراني.
Okay, thank you. I open now the presentation, and I tell you that it will be divided in two parts. In the first part, I will introduce some elements of the theory. That's very important. Of course, only elements, you know, just to give the sense of it and to understand the importance of it. And then I will talk of some projects, applications, if you want, that also involve a methodology that is the daughter of the theory, actually. While he will translate, I try to open the screen and share. Okay. Okay. Condividi. Okay. And now I don't remember what I have to do, but I think I have to press this. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
It's in
Really
progress.
large.
Voilà, c'est bon.
Okay. Okay. This is the most difficult part of the presentation, so I'm very glad. And let's go. There's an Oriental tradition that says that that describes the Arab city as a sort of chaotic and without order and so on. But in the last years, in the last 20, 30 years, we have realized that actually the Islamic Medina has an order. The order is not necessarily geometric, but it's an order that is perfectly logic and rational. And this also we discovered in part thanks to the application of the reading and interpretation based on the theory of Saverio Muratori. Now, the main problem when we face the problem of the rehabilitation of the Medinas is how to reconcile protection and transformation of historic centers. Let's see, because I have a problem here. I have to move this. Okay.
Yeah, you can
Okay.
click on.
Yeah, it's okay. I can read now. And transformation in historic centers. Is it possible to find methodologies of reading and design that are not case-by-case solutions by generalizable while respecting the different cultural contexts? So it's very clear. We need a methodology that is generalized, that can be transmitted also to various operators, and that is not just the invention of artists or personalities like that.
All right. Let me translate this rapidly. المداخلة لديها قسمين. القسم الأول يتطرق أكثرها لبعض الأسس والمعلومات النظرية لماخذ مراجعها من المدرسة الإيطالية اللي وراها كانيجا أند موراتوري. والقسم الثاني من المداخلة راح نظهر بعض أمثلة تطبيق هذه النظرية على بعض الأمثلة. ففي البداية يعني في السبعينات خلينا نقول أو أواخر السبعينات، يعني كانت فيه نظرة للمدينة كمدينة كمدينة يعني غير منظمة، وهذا راجع لبعض المراجع، إنه المراجع اللي كانت مستعملة كانت كلها يعني مراجع لماخذة بعين الاعتبار الجيومتري، خلينا نقول مش النظام كله يعني حسب الجيومتري. في البداية راح نشوف كيف يمكننا التوفيق ما بين المحافظة والتغيير الأحياء التاريخية. هذا السؤال الأول. السؤال الثاني، هل ممكن إيجاد مناهج لقراءة وتحليل وتصميم بصفة عامة وليست متعلقة بفرد أو بمدينة معينة، يعني هو الطموح هون إنه كيف يعني نأخذ بعين الاعتبار البعد المحيطي الثقافي الذي يكون يعني يسمح لنا أن تكون يعني التطرق بصفة شمولية وليست يعني كجزئيات حسب بأخذ عين الاعتبار المحيط الثقافي بالطبع.
One important point is that the analysis of the city that we call reading and the urban design are not two separate disciplines, but moments of the same integrated process. So we can, it seems obvious, but in reality, in the practice, many operators and many architects, they have a wonderful analysis, and then they invent a project that is totally autonomous and not related to the analysis. For us, the design choices are consequent and consistent with the analysis. The urban fabric, unlike a sculpture, is a dynamic organism. It's not an object, but it is an organism, a life. It cannot be frozen with the restoration. What means this? That we have to apply a methodology that has to take in consideration the problem that the urban context the historic districts, and so on, are a life organism. Indeed, this idea of the freezing the fabric is more a Western idea that comes from the modern movement. In fact, indeed, in many non-European cultures, the transformation of urban fabric is an intrinsic value, like in Islamic countries, for instance. And lastly, it is essential to reconstruct the continuity with the history that was interrupted by the modern movement, since, in my opinion, the principles, the knowledge, the experience, and the know-how are embedded in history, and we can retrieve them through history.
تحليل المدينة والتصميم الحضاري يصبان في نفس الشيء، وليس هناك تناقض يعني بينهما. كلاهما يعني لديهم يعني مراحل يعني منضبطة وعملية وعلمية وعملية نقول. فالاختيارات في التصاميم ممكن تكون نتيجة ذات علاقة وثيقة مع التحليل. والنسيج العمراني هو يعني بالنسبة إلي كائن حي ديناميكي، ومن الخطأ اعتباره كجامد أو كمجسم منحصر إلا للترميم. بالتأكيد المجتمعات ذات الثقافة الغير خلينا نقول الأوروبية أو الغربية تعتبر نسيج الحضاري ذات قيمة جوهرية. لذا من المهم أن نسعى إلى إعادة الصلة والتواصل ما بين التاريخ الذي يعني مع الحداثة أو المودرن موفمنت، يعني كان وراء انقطاع هذا التواصل أو الوثيقة ما بين التاريخ والمعرفة، وما يؤدي إلى أن الهندسة المعمارية هي يعني لازم تكون يعني نعتبرها راسخة ونابعة ومن ضمن يعني الجانب التاريخي إلى حد ما، يعني في وثيقة يعني في علاقة جد وثيقة ما بين النظرية والتاريخ في الهندسة المعمارية.
Okay, about reading, if we have a language that a code, we can fully understand the text. Code is a collective creation, not a self-referential invention as the languages of many contemporary designers. I think this is clear. Code is embedded in the text. In our case, the urban fabric. So we say that the code is embedded in the urban fabric, and it must be retrieved with a patient philological work in which it is possible to classify and extrapolate categories called types.
يعني لما نتكلم يعني لما العلاقة أو التواصل هي باستعمال خلينا نقول اللغة. هذه اللغة عندها يعني قوانين، عندها قواعد فبالتالي دون هذه القواعد ودون هذه القوانين يعني المعترف بها كمجتمع عايشين فيها كمجتمع، غير ممكن التواصل أو كذلك غير ممكن التحدث أو فهم بعضنا البعض. فالقواعد هي ابتكار جماعي وليس يعني ابتكار فردي أو شخصي ممثل، وهو حل من الحلول لتحليل فيما يخص التصميم للمهندسين، راسخة في النص ومعبرة على النص. وفيما يخص النسيج العمراني الذي يجب استرجاعه من الجانب اللغوي أو المحتوى والمضمون حتى يمكننا التصنيف والاستنباط فئات التي نسميها أنماط في العمارة.
The type is a very important conceptual tool because it speeds enormously our reading of the urban fabric and the architecture also. We can define the type as the integral, in terms of mathematical integral, of the common features of buildings in a specific geographic area and in a given historical period, which means that the type changes over time, obviously, according to the needs and the habits of the society, and changes also in relation with the space, in the sense that one city and another city, they have different types. It's not a static image taken from the store of the history, but a process. In that sense, we prefer, instead of type, we prefer to talk of typological process. The body that comprising the building types, the fabric types, and the urban typical behaviors are the code of the city. And this is what we try to discover, what we need to discover with our reading.
النمط في العمارة هو الميزة الكاملة أو الشاملة التي من خلالها نعبر أو نعرف على منطقة جغرافية أو البعد الثقافي كذلك، سواء من ناحية المواد أو الفراغات فيما يخص المدينة أو البناية. وبالتالي فالنمط يعتبر حسب الوقت والمكان، وليس جامدة نأخذها من الأرشيف أو المخزن التاريخي. هو عملية متواصلة وديناميكية. وكذلك النمط موجود يعني قبل تجسيده في الواقع، مثل ما هذا يعني في تطرق إليه في السابق يعني كواترمير دي كوينسي لما عرف ما بين النمط والمود. وهو موجود، النمط موجود ذهنيا سواء على مستوى الفرد أو على مستوى المجتمع.
Okay, here let me move the images. Okay, here we have a scheme in which I have resumed this idea of the typological process. I will explain it very, very quickly and hoping that it will clarify the problem. I'll do now something. Okay. We have here the line of the time. Okay. And along the line of the time, we put this typological process is related to the house. That's more simple. And so at a certain given moment, the people living in a certain area, the community, they have in mind already a clear idea of what the house is and how to build it. And this idea, which is a type, okay, is a priori. That means they know before how to make it. And they know it spontaneously, we say. But, this type is abstract, is an idea, I insist. But when they apply this idea to the real construction of the houses in the site, they have to face the problems of the reality. That means irregularity of the plot, the sloping, the plot, or whatever you want. That means that the real product will be a variation of the type, but it will be a real architecture, okay? And I have put them here, okay? In time, what happens? That in time, it means that from one generation to the other, the type that we call current type, those that the community has in mind, will change in itself because of the changes of the habits of the people, but also with the contribute of all the variations that are examples of application of the type itself. Now let's move to the other images here. In relation with the scale of every type, that means the building type, we have a correspondent typical aggregation, let's say, okay, in which the type fits. And to every typical aggregation, there will be a typical urban plan, okay, in which that is related to this plan. It is obvious, but sometimes for architects forget it. Now let's we go back to the time, and so under normal conditions, every generation we have a new current type, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth, that develops. But at a certain point, you know, the city doesn't grow regularly, you know, it would be too easy. You know, you have problems, you have calamities, you have crises in general that might stop the growth of the city, or they can delay simply that. We say this is a crisis, okay, that practically during the crisis, what is a crisis? It's a moment in which the system doesn't work perfectly and should be reorganized. A crisis could be economical, could be health calamity like COVID, or can be, in your case, in Algeria, could be the French occupation during the colonial period, for instance. In that time, you know, this spontaneous phenomenon of the growth of the type doesn't go anymore, because cities are in crisis, they don't grow, and therefore the current type doesn't grow also, it stops. But on the contrary, you see in the lower part that the variations, they continue to happen in the city or in the existing fabric. Therefore, the typological variations, they go on in time. What happens at the end of the crisis? At the end of the crisis, it happens that the people, they have lost the idea of current type belonging to their culture. at that point, at the end of the crisis, what they do to recuperate that, they refer to a different culture or civilization that they consider, from the point of view of the culture in general, superior. So in the case of, for instance, Italy, in my case, at the end of the 19th century, we refer to Vienna and Paris because automatically we used to consider Vienna and Paris superior in terms of culture. And then they import from that superior culture this idea. But then this idea meets all the variations, that are always occurring. In this sense, clearly, a 19th century city of Italy that copied from Vienna produced a fabric and houses that are different from another city like Rome that actually copied more from Paris, for instance, okay? Or that in any case had a different substratum that was coming from the variations. Okay, so we are almost finished. Then a new current type is formed by this intersection, connection, and the process goes on. Now, when we arrive to the present, okay, that might be here, the history has given to us a body of knowledge and principles and guidelines for the project. But in reality, we are still in a crisis, okay? So we don't know now how the urban fabric should be organized. We don't know how the house should be made. We don't even know how to organize a kitchen, because most of the people in Algeria or in Italy, they think that the house is more similar to the ranch of an American soap opera more than to their own cultures. So the problem is that when we face a problem in the urban fabric now, and we have to rehabilitate that, we have to go back analytically along this history and reconstruct all the process critically. Not spontaneously is gone, not possible anymore. So we have to reconstruct all that critically. So we have to take the stratification of the history physically in the city, remove theoretically, stratum by stratum, and reconstitute all this knowledge. Knowledge that actually is the code.
Right.
Okay.
Shall I translate these ones? It might be a bit hard for me, but I will do my best.
I had to stop a while. Okay, let's start with the beginning, the line of the time and the current time.
Yes, that's why. يعني هون في الرسم هذا فيه خط يدل على الزمن. الخط هذا الخط الأفقي يدل على الزمن، وفي نفس الوقت فيما يخص النمط في أحكام مسبقة للنمط كنمط فيما يخص توزيع الفضاءات، وهذا كان يعني هذه الأحكام يعني كانت يعني تتداولها يعني أجيال يعني نوع من الجانب الثقافي، يعني من جيل إلى جيل، وعبر الزمن فصبحت فيه التغييرات هذه مش من جانب هو تجسيد هذا النمط في الواقع، والواقع هذا من جانب الطبوغرافي أو من جانب الشكل البلوت، يعني البقعة اللي يكون فيه هذا البناء أو هذا النمط. وكل جيل يعني لديه فكرة مسبقة حول السكن الذي ممكن نسميه النمط السكني. وفي الواقع الشكل والطبوغرافي هما بالتالي لديهم هذا التأثير، وكذلك فيه الأزمات كحروب يعني خلينا نقول حتى استعمار ثقافي حتى هذا. فهذا أدى كذلك إلى التغيير في النمط من ناحية نوعية الفراغ، أو خلينا نقول النموذج للفراغ أو للنمط. هذا I don't know if I summarize يعني briefly what the professor wanted to highlight concerning, let's say, to demonstrate that the type is dynamic and it is also transformative, and also how the crisis had that impact on, I will say, the metamorphosis of the types.
During this process of reconstruction of the typological process, we encounter many typical behaviors of the fabric that are almost universal and that you find with different declinations in different countries of the Islamic world. Very quickly, for instance, this is Sevilla. It's originally a Roman city with a large contribute of the Arab culture that dominated that area for centuries. You see here, I have marked, let's see if I can see. I don't, oh, okay. Forgive me, I have to find the point. It's very hard. Okay, you see here, we call this the foot of the chicken. Okay, or we can call that, I call also that mustache, however you want. But whenever we find this kind of mustache, here one, here another one, and here another one, okay, we are sure that it's a moment in which the movement is obliged to go through a very narrow passage. In general, it's a gate of a city. Even if there's no more gate in the city, we can be sure that that is an original place of the location of the gate. Or, with another exception, the number 4 that I have marked to the left, that might be a bridge, because we are also able to reconstruct through the behavior of the urban fabric. We can also reconstruct, for instance, the presence of an old bed of a river, as in this case, that I have reconstructed there. What is interesting is that in this area, you see, that was a sort of a small lake or swamp. It is interesting to note that all the fabric that is here, okay, that in normal condition would face the water and the river. In the medieval period, normally used to neglect the river, the water, and the sea, and it was looking into the city, as in this case. So if you look in detail, this fabric, it is oriented towards the city and not towards that, which confirmed the fact that that was a sort of swampy area that was neglected by the city, and so on and so forth. The other interesting thing is, again, just to confirm the theory, even when the system is reverted, as in the case of number 1, you see below, you see the 4 roads that are pointing into the gate of the big building. That is the JAMA, and the JAMA is in that position because actually it was at the edges of the Roman city. So the position of the JAMA induced also a change, a notable change into the morphology of the urban fabric.
Right. هون قراءة مدينة سيفيلا. مدينة سيفيلا هي في الواقع مدينة رومانية قبل ما تكون يعني طورتها الحضارة العربية الإسلامية. وهون هو فيما يخص النمط في أو الهيكل تاع النسيج، إنه فيها التقاطع في بعض التقاطع، يعني بعض الطرق مثلا في رقم جنب رقم 2 أو رقم 1 أو رقم 4، يعني هو سماها ك يعني تشيكن في يعني رجل الدجاجة، يعني في
الدجاجة
أي الدجاجة أي. وهذا يعني هذا في الواقع هذون كلهم يا اما في المسجد في رقم 1 او البوابه، يعني فيه انفصال او ما بين يعني كيف كان التطور النمط او الانماط المستعمله. كذلك بجنب رقم 5 وين في الجسر، انه في هذا الانماط مع تطورها كان مرحلي، مش ك صدفه او ك في كلهم في نفس الوقت في نفس الوقت.
Now we can go a bit quicker. This is a small portion of the fabric of the historic city of Tunis, and you see that there is clearly visible in the center part a sort of regular settlement with a chicken foot that actually was probably in front of an old gate of this small settlement that has been closed later on. And the other interesting thing is that all the streets they carve because they tend to avoid the sediment. You see, and so they are concave and convex curves that tend to surround this sediment.
هون في هذا المجمع أو الحي السكني بتونس نوعا ما النسيج منظم، فنفس الشيء فيما يخص بجنب البوابة، نفس النمط فيما يخص الشوارع، وهون كذلك فيما يخص الشوارع المنحنية والمباني، هي محاولة تجاوز النسيج الأصلي المبني على الجريد.
When we see curves, irregular layout of the fabric, we don't have to imagine that there was a funny architect that was designing those curves, but they have been designed by necessity and by the reality. This is another case. This is the mosque, Karawin Mosque in Fez, that was built as a freestanding regular structure in the middle of almost open space. But later on, the fabric had to avoid and adjust to it, you know, as you can see. So the curves are determined by the presence of the obstacle, let's call.
نفس الملاحظة حول مسجد القرويين بفاس، هون نلاحظ انه النسيج حول المسجد يتفادى متابعة الشكل المنظم للمسجد.
From the behavior of the fabric, we can also determine, and this is very important, the hierarchy and the importance of the streets. They look off, sometimes they have almost the same section, but in reality, they have a specific role within the fabric. Example, very, very quickly. If we are along the main street, okay, which is this here, you see that the urban fabric, the houses, can go from the beginning up to the end until they stop after a while, because it's important also to occupy the back of the land. Okay. Then when you have a secondary, or we call them implant streets or implant paths, you see that the behavior of the fabric is different, because up to the end, if you want, but starting from here, obviously, because the rest is already occupied. So this one is a second type of fabric. And look, at a certain point, at a certain distance, normally the block tends to be closed. And this and create a path that we call connection path or street. Okay. Now, sometimes it happens also that when the fabric is formed, okay, two poles, you know, I marked here a bridge and I marked here a mosque, or a very important mosque, becomes so important, so attractive, that they induce a cut or a demolition even through the existing fabric, okay? And this is the demolition. How do you see how do you recognize that? You recognize that because all the plots of the insisting fabric are triangular or trapezoidal often, because they are cut normally diagonally. Okay, so whenever you find plots that are cut in this way, okay, like this, etc., like look at this, we are in presence of restructuration. So chronologically, it happened later on. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we can do this.
Right.
You can translate.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I put numbers.
Yeah. انطلاقا من المباني كعنصر أساسي في النسيج العمراني، هون نلاحظ أنه في كذلك تصنيف أو النسيج حسب يعني في تصنيف حسب الأهمية خلينا نقول، وفي نفس الوقت لما نعمل يعني هذا التسلسل فيما يخص التطوير يخلينا مثلا بعض الأشكال اللي تكون مثلا ذات الشكل المثلث، هذه تخلينا نكون فيه يعني انه فيه إعادة هيكلة، مثل ما حاول يوضح ما بين الجسر والمسجد والشكل البقع في هذا الخريطة.
In this way, we discovered that the thoroughfare, okay, the cut and demolition through the city are not an invention of Osman, but it always occurred, even in the medieval Islamic cities. When, if we have a plan like this, that is, in this case, is the plan 1 to 200 with all the houses of Kairouan in Tunisia. We have potentially a real X-ray document that will give us a lot of information, and will allow also to make, for instance, this analysis of the hierarchy of the streets, for instance, and the behavior of the fabric. Okay. We can separate, for instance, the behavior of the matrix. Oh, no, well, let's say, sorry. For instance, how can we understand, if we take just one block, okay, how can we understand which street is a matrix, which street is implant, and which one is a connection? By the behavior. If you see the yellow houses, they are all regular along the side of the block. It means that they were able to build in an empty block without constriction, without obstacles. But if you see the opposite, the white one, you would see that they had to fit the fabric in this area particularly, and they had to deform it in order to adapt to the condition. Chronologically, it is the second one. So when you look at that, you see, okay, this is the matrix to the left, that is the implant to the right. And then you see the cork, you know, the cork of red color that is just in the middle to close the block here. Typical, very typical.
هون في هذا الخريطة حاولت توضيح ما بين تصنيف النسيج والنمط. ففي باللون الأصفر يعني هذا يعني المجمع يعني كنسيج ممكن هو يعني أسهل شيء، وما كانش يعني ما مرش بتحويلات أو تغييرات بالمقارنة للأنماط باللون الأبيض. وهذا اللون هذا النمط بالتالي يعتبر طور بعد ما طور النمط باللون الأصفر، والآخر هو بالبني.
Therefore, at that point, you can separate, you know, the different behaviors of the fabric in order to make more clear a fabric that otherwise is extremely complicated. For instance, these are the urban fabric that are matrix, that have a matrix behavior. And it is interesting because you also have interesting confirms. For instance, this part here is a territorial part, is a caravan road, you know, that has been used centuries before the foundation of Kairouan, but that has been confirmed, you know, during the construction of Kairouan as the main bazaar.
Right. هون في هذا الخريطة نحاول تجسيد يعني نفس الشيء فيما يخص الهيكل النسيج العمراني الأساسي. فمثلا هذا اللي أشار إليه البروفيسور هو كان قبل تأسيس مدينة قيروان كمدينة بأحسنها وبواباتها. كان يعني هذا كان يعني أكثره يعني معتبر ك شارع أو نسيج للسوق للتجارة فهذا يعني هذا النسيج ممكن نسميه الرئيسي من جانب الترتيب أو الهيكلي. يعني لما نشوف هذا يمر على معظم يعني المنطقة أو المدينة، يعني الهيكل المدينة راجع على يعني مرتبط بهذا هذا النسيج كنسيج رئيسي.
We have implant streets or secondary, and a very typical behavior that is what we call the dead lane fabric. That is characterized by the fact that in this case we have a cluster of houses that are served by just one axis, a lane that is also a dead lane, cul-de-sac in French. I have to say, and they occupy a large part of the fabric of the city, and they have a peculiar structure that you know very well, so I don't describe more than that. I only want to say one thing. The cul-de-sac is not is very diffused in the Islamic countries, not only Arab but also in Iran, etc. But they are not specific of the Islamic city. They are specific of the courtyard house fabric. So wherever you have courtyard house fabric, you have the formation of clusters of cul-de-sac.
هذا النسيج الثاني يعني يعني لما نشوف لما نوضعه مع النسيج الأول أنه فيه يعني هذا يعتبر كثانوي، وفي نفس الوقت النمط هون يعني أنه how can I call it cul-de-sac يعني هذا يعني معظمهم هذا النسيج ينتهي بما يسمى الكل دساك، هو النسيج كذلك كله يعني الخصوصية في هذا النسيج انه كله مبني حول الفناء او وسط الدار او الحوش، لكن الكل دساك مش يعني شيء مش يعني خصوصية للمدينة العربية والمدينة الإسلامية فقط.
And then you can recombine the various hierarchies of the streets all together, and you have a general vision of the now of the city from another point of view. So here you have the clear hierarchy of the streets with the main street, the secondary streets, and so on and so forth in one view, immediately and very clear. The red is the matrix. Here.
هون نشوف يعني الخريطة هذه توضح لنا يعني التسلسل أو فيما يخص الطرق، كل ما هو باللون الأحمر هو لون يعني الشوارع نقول الرئيسية على مستوى المدينة، ثم هذه نوعا ما سوداء الثانوية أو السكندري، والباقي هو فيه أنه كلاستر في مجمعات وكلها يعني تنتهي بكل دساك، وكذلك المبنى معظمهم فيها فناء.
Finally, you can from these typological behaviors, you can even detect phenomena that are not in the surface, but from signs that you have in the present plan. You can understand sometimes what is underground. So you can make what we call the archaeology without archaeology without excavation. A typical example is the city of Hammamet, for instance. Officially, the city was built in the 14th century around well, the fortress monastery that it's called, the term doesn't come now. Okay, forget. Around this fortress here, but in reality, looking at the fabric, I realized that the fabric is quite regular, and it is organized in a grid whose module is actually that of 100 Roman feet. And we know that the standards of the measures are like the signature of a civilization. So no way that that grid is Roman. And which means that there was probably a previous settlement, Roman settlement, or maybe that they have reused a land division of the Roman period to build the Muslim house, the Muslim city on top of it. Okay, that can be discovered only with the real excavation. But for sure, we can read a previous settlement, small, very small, few families, the one that you see here, by the presence of various mustache, one here, and one here, you know, that clearly mark a small settlement with 3 gates. We don't know if Roman or not, maybe Visigoth, okay, pre-Islamic probably, but previous anyway. So at the end of this very quick excursus in the reading of the city, and there are other typological behaviors, of course, that help you to reconstruct all the code, you know, but it is essential that the code of the city every time is reconstructed, because we decide what kind of interventions of rehabilitation, conservation, restoration we are going to make into the fabric.
في هذا الخريطة اللي تمثل مدينة أو جزء من مدينة الحمامات، باستعمال هذا الوسيلة لتحليل المدينة باستعمال النمط، فيمكننا التطرق إلى أو يؤدينا إلى التحليل، خلينا نقول الاركيولوجي، دون يعني باستعمال هذا الوسيله، ويمكننا بالتالي التعرف على اثار التي هي تحت البنايات. وهو هون يعني في هذه الحاله انه النمط هو ذات اثار رومانيه. واما فيما يخص البوابات ممكن هو يعني قبل الحضاره الاسلاميه. وهون هذه 3 بوابات موجوده اشار اليها ك يعني في الخريطه.
Well, at this point, let's talk a little bit on methodology, and the problem of the rehabilitation of the intervention in the historic urban fabric. I have reduced to 2 main ones that I have considered the 2 extremes of all the possible interventions that we can make. Okay. So those that I'm going to show are examples that are extremes on one side or the other side. On one side, we have a case of a continuous fabric that is well preserved altogether, but probably decaying because of goggling of overcrowding, and which is a normal process, you know, because it's part of the life of the city. But sometimes this process of encroachment leads to pathological levels. On the opposite, exactly on the opposite, we have the case of large gaps that come from demolition that are due to war causes or insipidity of the people, often more because of the insipidity of the people than the war cases. In the case of in Qatar, I faces in 5 years problems of design or redesigning those gaps, trying to reorganize the thing, but it will come. Frequent cases of radical demolitions and reconstruction of historic districts happen in the Gulf and in the Middle East, as operators, the architects, the technicians, and so on, don't have the tools to read what we have done up to now and understand the complex structure of the old fabric, that is the code, which they read as simple chaos. So they consider that what is the medieval fabric is chaotic and chaos. And the simple thing they do is demolish it, because basically they don't understand it.
في ما يخص إعادة تأهيل النسيج العمراني العريق، يمكننا استخلاص هذا أو تقسيمه إلى نوعين. الأول ممكن يرجع إلى الاكتظاظ في النسيج، وهذا راجع للنمو، وممكن إلى حد ما يعتبر كطبيعي، لكن يستنتج منه هي بعض الحالات فيما يخص تدهور البنايات. وأما الثاني هو يتعلق ببعض الفراغات الموجودة في النسيج، وهذا راجع للتهديم أثناء الحروب أو عدم الالتزام من طرف خلينا نقول مش سواء سكان أو يعني the occupant في الموقع. في عدة حالات خاصة في دول الخليج، وعلى سبيل المثال في الدوحة، أنه كان هناك يعني تهديم وإعادة بناء أحياء تاريخية، لكن هذا الإعادة ترميم أو إعادة البناء، خلينا نقول من البعض خلت مكان هذه مباني أخرى، كان معمول بدون يعني فهم أو بدون محاولة فهم أو قراءة النسيج كنسيج تاريخي، ولذا هذا اللي أدى نوع من يعتبر نوع من الفوضى في النسيج.
Good. So we start with the first example that belongs to the case of the goggling, and we move to Tartus, a city in Syria, very famous. It was the last city and citadel occupied by the Crusaders. What you see here is the citadel that is made out of two lines or perimeters of walls that included the citadel of the Crusaders, and in particular, this is the donjon. Okay, the strongest part of the castle. You see the line, the external line of the internal and the external line. The external line is here. Oh my God. Okay. Now, after the Crusaders left, it was occupied by the Mamluks, but at that point it hadn't anymore any military value, so it was occupied by normal people that basically encroached, occupied, every space, and even they built on top of the monuments and so on. So we have now a situation of overcrowding that is terrible,
هون عندنا في القلعة. Okay, you want to continue and then I'll translate for both?
Okay, yes, I can continue.
Yes.
So basically, we made a precise survey of the different levels of the, this is minus 3 meters, and then we go on, this is 0, and then we go on top, and then we have plus 4, 5, and then we have plus 10 or 11 here. Okay, so you see that most of the Crusader structures are visible at the level 0. Okay, then as soon as you go on top, you see only the little tiny houses of the people, and most of the buildings, they are occupied even by the tiny houses, that are not, that sometimes are not, let's say, that don't reach a minimum human level. They don't have facilities and services. This is the cathedral. The cathedral, 2 bays of the cathedral were demolished, and they built in the 2 bays that you see here, the front, they built again tiny houses, and only this part, the monumental part, is mixed with it. Now, what to do in this case? And this is a very intriguing problem of methodology and also a theory, if you want. Now, if you want to work as the French archaeologists of the 1930s in Syria, what they did in cases like this, they simply removed and demolished whatever was not belonging to the period of the Crusaders. So this is what they did in a famous castle called Crac de Chevalier. Or we know that nowadays this attitude cannot be applied because it is not historical. So in a certain way, we have to accept and we have to deal with all the phases of the process of the history. Even those houses have some historical value, not everywhere, but they contain, because they are the testimony of life. Now you can translate if you want.
Yeah. فيما يخص هذه القلعة أو الحصن في مدينة طرطوس بسوريا، شوف لاحظنا إنه في الصورة الأولى كان فيه يعني حدود هذا القلعة التي مسمات القلعة الصليبية، وبعدها أخذوها المملوك. لكن سوف تقول هون أنه هذا القلعة هو الشيء اللي المميز، أنه الكثافة السكانية أو أثرت سلبيا على كانت وراء تدهور الكاتدرال. حتى نقول لما نشوف في هذه الصورة في بعض الإضافات في المباني بدون يعني أدنى الشروط للحياة الضرورية. وفي قبل هذا كان اتطرق إلى المراحل التي مرت بها هذه القلعة من ناحية التعمير خلينا نقول، وكذلك حسب the levels لنيفو فيما يخص تطوير هذا القلعة. في الدكتور اللي هي هدمت يعني خلينا نقول أكثرها من سبب تهديمها هو راجع نوعا ما إلى الكثافة السكانية الغير شرعية.
Okay, so what to do in cases like that? Well, we have a great help from the typological process, actually. What you see here is the Hall of the Knights, which consists in a basement on galleries here, okay, that are well preserved, and they would just require a restoration and so on, but basically easy task. And then an upper part that actually was the big hall of the meetings of the knights that actually has been encroached completely by tiny ladle houses, as you can see from the section here or here, you see the section. Originally, it was something like this, no? And then it has been encroached completely. You have here a detail. What was a large hall is reduced now to a narrow lane that leads to the various houses to the right and to the left, where poor people live. And you have also part of the vault that is preserved. So now, what to do? If you look at the bottom of this image, it's very small, it's a bit difficult, but we have tried here to reconstruct the process of encroachment that occurred into the hall. So few houses, you know, they all had the two entrances, one here and one here. So it was a certain point crossed in this way, you know, diagonally, when it was empty. But then people started to build those tiny houses along this path, you know, and using the main wall first, here and here, the two walls on both sides, and having in front a sort of open yard, you know, for every tiny house. And then they encroached the yards, occupied the yards, and then they went up, you know, and they built on top of it until we got to this pathological condition. So at this point, it will not be difficult to decide what is pathological and should be demolished, and what is a good testimony of the history and should be preserved. So most probably this phase, you know, and this phase should be demolished. I mean, I refer only to the little houses, the red ones, but the others, in that case, can be preserved, you know, because of testimony, together with the vaults and the architecture of the Crusaders.
طبقا للمراحل النمط هنا يمكننا الاستطلاع على المراحل التغييرات لبعض منها كانت يعني معمولة بطريقة يعني خلينا نقول إلى حد ما غير منظمة، فبالتالي يمكننا إطلاع أو تشخيص في ترميمها، حذف كل ما يعني أضيف وغير للنمط أو الشكل الأصلي للبناية.
At this point, of course, you can also, in order to restore the parts that have to be restored in related to the houses and also the monuments, you can refer, for instance, to the experience that we had in Italy, that is called the Manuale del Recupero, a manual of rehabilitation, if you want, that used to be prepared for every city, every fabric in Italy, trying to understand and make a manual with drawings in which the typical systems of construction were reproduced so that it was easily usable by the operators. Also, because we have to consider that in the city, in the supposed 17th century, there's only one way of making the trusses, or there's one way of making a vault, you know, in general, maximum two. So it's not so difficult to create this kind of typical manual of the rehabilitation.
هون هذا كنموذج مانيوال اوف ريهابيليتيشن، يعني لمحاولة يعني الترميم في الموجود، يعني على يعني ريجوليشن او طرق او فيما يخص الترميم الموجود بايطاليا اللي ممكن نستوحى منه او ناخذه يعني كمرجع للترميم مع كل بنود البناء. من ناحيه تقنيات البناء ممكن تكون محصوره الى حد ما، يعني الى نمط او نمطين، وكذلك فيما يخص الهيكل او التفاصيل اللازمه في الترميم.
Okay, now we move to the other condition, the opposite one, the problem of what to do with the gaps. And okay, let's see what we can do. So the problem, I call that mending the hole, basically. That means that we, with the instruments that we have, looking at the previous maps of the fabric that was there, if we can have that, or looking at the present situation, we try to find the weft and the warp of the fabric. Okay, that means trama and ordito in Italian. Okay, like a carpet with an hole, and we try to reconnect them to put them together. Out of metaphor, this means finding all the elements of the interrupted building relationship, such as road axis, visual axis, aggregations, or interrupted building blocks, etc., and reconstituting, you know, these parts, these pieces, with the patient work, the sense of the narration with building types and architectures that are consistent with the place. Of course, these relations that we constitute should be also integrated with the project. So there will be an integration of architecture, evidently, but this architecture will be consistent and coherent with the building types and the history of the site, obviously. What we propose is a radical paradigm shift. Is therefore proposed with respect to the current practice of real estate that fills the gaps with any commercial building. Nowadays, you know what happens, particularly in the Gulf, you know, they have this big hole, and then the real estate arrives and they just infill with commercial buildings of poor quality sometimes, and without any logic or connection with the previous existing situation.
Right. how can I say it? النوع الثاني للمراحل النمطية تحليل الناس بدون الاستعارة أو المجاز، فإعادة تشكيل الشبكة، يعني أنه كل العناصر المتوفرة أو المتقاطعة كطرق، كبرسبكتيف، كبنايات as monument، هذون كلهم يعني يمثلوا هذا النسيج. فالتوجه أو التحول الجذري لهذه الممارسات، خاصة هذا ملء الفراغات لأغراض كلها يعني للربح ببنايات يعني ممكن تعتبر جديدة كمراكز أو بنايات تجارية. هذا يؤدي بنا إلى المراجعة أو التوجه الجذري فيما يخص الترميم في أحياء مثل هذه.
So we, in the case of Antakya, where there is still a memory of the old Roman layout of the streets and the fabric, very serial and repetitive system of courtyard houses, you know, very regular, that's still readable nowadays in the fabric. There was a big gap just at the edge of the old city. This is the typical house of the old city that you can see, and it's interesting because Antakya is a city that is just at it's a frontier, if you want, between two cultures, the Arab and the Turks, and this house shows very well this kind of presence in the same time of two cultures. On top, you have a typical timber structure of Ottoman tradition, and the base is a typical Arab, Syrian architecture of stone and heavy and so on. And I was saying that the big hole at the edge of the city, that where the municipality wanted to make a settlement for old age people and also people that were commuting and going to the nearby bazaar. So we simply infilled this area, trying also to find some reconnections with the existing surrounding fabric, but basically with a very simple pedestrian structure of courtyard houses, courtyard houses, okay, and without hierarchy, you know, or practically without hierarchy, like the old fabric of Antakya. And also the single buildings, you know, they try to maintain the same character, a base that is stonish, masonry, heavy, and where the old age people can go, and the other people that can climb the stairs, they can go on top in the timber light addition on top of it.
هذه هون بعض الأمثلة للبيت أو لبيوت، وفي يعني التراكم الحضاري ما بين التركي العربي، وكذلك من ناحية استعمال مواد البناء النمط خلينا نقول سوري، وكذلك يعني في من ناحية التصنيف أو التدريج أو هذا المرافق، سواء يعني بالنسبة للبناية يعني كوجود الفناء أو طرقات للمشاة فقط قبل، والعلاقة ما بين المجمع مع السوق أو البازار.
Okay. Another case is the Bazaar of Bukhara. This is how it was before the demolitions made by Stalin, you know, in the 30s. And it was a continuous path surrounded by monumental structures of caravanserais, madrasas, mosques, and so on and so forth. After the demolition, Stalin left in the city large gaps, you know, into this monumental fabric that actually are still there because it's not easy to put the hands on it. And the Soviet architects, I have to say, they have quite dangerous ideas about the transformation. So I hope that something better will happen. We made an exercise here, particularly in this area that you see here, at the exit of the ancient gate of the city that is here, and it was a very simple tentative of recuperating certain orientations that existed into the fabric, recuperating standards and sizes of the monumental elements that you. This is the intervention, only this part. And also the logical alignment along the main part, which is the most logic and the most simple. So I think that this project is reasonable in the fact that it is simple, in the fact that it tries to recuperate standards, size, elements of the old fabric, and also alignments. Different the case of Doha that you see here. And you want to translate? Sorry, you can translate the piece about Bukhara, and then we move to Doha. And then we finish.
Yeah, for the case of Bukhara, what فيما يخص بخارى كان فيه الخريطة المدينة قبل تهديمها في الثلاثينات، وبعدها يعني كان في يعني هذا الفراغات، فكان في محاولة بأخذ فراغ بجنب البوابة لإعادة إحياء أو ترميم المنطقة، مع العلم أنه هذه يعني تعتبر كمنطقة حساسة في ناحية الترميم. وكانت في هذه المحاولة في بإعادة إحياء النمط أو بإعادة بالترميم.
Finally, Doha. This is downtown Doha, and what you see to the left and to the right is what the inhabitants have in mind about the current type of Doha. That is individual buildings, like objects, you know, like a lighter, whatever you want, etc., in the middle of the void and surrounded by empty spaces, you know, relations are lost, etc., etc., etc. The big problem is that the same idea had also my students, girls, very nice girls and very interested into the architecture, so willing and so on. But unfortunately, they had completely lost the memory, the spontaneous memory of the current type and fabric of old Doha that nevertheless existed, you know. If we look at this plan of the old city in 50 years ago or 40 years ago, we can read a lot of interesting things. There is a dense fabric on the right, for instance, and you see an old territorial path, another one converging, merging in this point that actually I'll tell you later. And then most of the city is organized here. But also we see more recent, more planned parts that you see, okay? We see a swampy area very clearly here. And here, very clearly, an old bridge that actually disappeared, that was practically here, marked by this mustache that you see here, and so on. And other things you can see. Look also, this is interesting stuff. All the path here, the territorial path, subdivides here, but stops here because this is the edge of the old swamp area. Okay, anyway, just to tell you that existed something even in Doha that was a very simple village. But the same area after, this is 10 years ago or something, it became a sort of city in which you have small parts still preserved there, abandoned by the local people and squatters by Pakistanis or whatever. Here, etc. Here. But also buildings, okay, modern buildings scattered there without much logic, and and big gaps. Big gaps, here and there and so on. So I decided that topic that was probably the most interesting in the place of Doha, like Doha, that is under pressure of incredible pressures for rapid transformations without any care of the existing historic fabric. You want to translate and then I move on, I go forward.
Yeah. فيما يخص الدوحة يعني شفنا في البنايات هذون يعني كبنايات لحالها، ما فيش يعني علاقة مع المحيط أو مع الشارع أو مع الفراغات الأخرى. هذا الشيء الأول. الشيء الثاني أنه المدينة العريقة أو المركز التاريخي للدوحة الآن كان في يعني في نقول 30 سنة 40 سنة قبل كان فيه نوع من يعني التخلي من السكان، فبالتالي كان فيه نوع من الاكتظاظ، يعني أنه هذه البنايات معظمها كانوا يعني أخذوها العمال، كانوا يجوا من دول أخرى خاصة من باكستان، وبالتالي كان فيه اكتظاظ، وهذا كذلك أدى إلى نوع من تدهور البنايات إلى حد ما. خلينا نقول أنه حتى يعني ملاك هذه البنايات بغض النظر فيما يخص الميراث كان يعني كان وراء هذا للغرض أنه الاستعمال هذا البقعة لبنايات خلينا نقول معاصرة أو يعني أكثرها تكون ذات يعني من جانب التجاري أكثر، وأدى هذا نوع من speculation فيما يخص الأراضي في حد ذاتها. ولكن فيما يخص النسيج نفسه نفس النسيج اللي شفناه في المراكز العريقة السابقة.
The first year I made a terrible mistake. I said, look, let's take these voids and we divide, and I give you a plot, each of you, no? And then you try to build a fabric of buildings that actually collaborate together in order to make a fabric. And it was a disaster, because in reality they wanted their own plot in order to build an object right in the middle of the plot, very separate from the others, you know, and so on. So what I got, it was a sort of fair or Dubai or something like that, with pavilions, you know, every pavilion was absolutely striking, different, impressive, and so on, but no fabric at all. So the second year, I changed the strategy and said, look, these are the voids. Let's make a master plan together before. Also because I was giving a course, a theoretical course of reading the urban fabric and urban morphology. And so that helped. So at that point, we were able first to design the master plan in order to individuate the voids and the possible reconnection of the voids and the possible organization of the fabric in relation with the nodes that existed, some monuments, and so on and so forth. And that helped. And then at that point, you know, they were able to design the parts, and they were obliged to design the parts in a continuous fabric, okay, more collaborative and more logic. Of course, they had an incredible resistance, because when I said, look, if you can even touch your building with your colleague, they can share one wall if you introduce courtyards, for instance, no? So you reverse the logic, you can create a continuous fabric in which buildings are one next to the other and so on. So this tentative, it's slightly better, so I can show you, but of course it's on the way. And this is the same look from the top and so on. Then the last year we took one interesting site that was a huge parking, you know, and so surrounded by ugly big buildings, but nevertheless they cannot be demolished. So, but that more or less they defined a very large open space in which you can look at the top image. You can recuperate all the signs, all the streets existing. The gray is existing, and reinforce in such a way that you reinforce this part, and then you can build on top of it. That is the next area, and so on. So you can recreate this continuity, pedestrian, walkable continuity in the street, in the city, and you can recuperate also this old part here. And also you can individuate this old sign, you know, that you don't have just to infill casually. That is the old cemetery of the neighborhood. It makes sense, you know. So it could become something different, but it should be recuperated. And please, you know, use mixed development, different functions all together, as in the old city, but combine them together. Try to have a continuous fabric. And what you see below is the result. It's not a masterpiece, but at least I'm satisfied by the fact that compared to what is around, that to give you the sense of it, those students got the sensibility to the historic fabric, and they understood how rich it is and how many suggestions we can get from it for the guidelines for the intervention in those gaps. Well, I'm finished. What I told you is also in this book of mine that I wrote 12 years ago. It's out of print now, but if you want, if you are interested, I can send you the the file, and you can read it. And this is my address. If you send me an email, I will be very pleased to send you a PDF. Thank you very much for your attention. I go back if you want.
Thank you, Professor. Just شكرا Professor. Just يعني فيما يخص المشاريع الأخيرة، هذه مشاريع كان طورها أو البروفيسور مع الطلاب لما كان بالدوحة، واللي ممكن لنستنتج منه هو كيف يعني إعادة إحياء أو استعمال النمط أو فيما يخص تحسيس الطلاب فيما يخص إعادة إحياء التراث في بعض المناطق التراثية. وهذا يعني أتكلم هو على التجربة الأولى مع الطلاب، وهذا ممكن راجع لنوع من تطرق للمشاريع. أنه الطلاب بالنسبة لي التجربة الأولى كانت نوعا ما فاشلة، لأن الطلاب كانوا كلهم يعني منصبين حول يعني المشروع. بالنسبة لي المشروع في حد ذاته بدون يعني الانسجام مع المشاريع الأخرى لتكوين هذا لو تكون continuity متابعة للكل، يعني كله يعني متشبك يعني في يعني تخليها يعني as الاتجاه أو التصور أن يكون كلي مش فردي. هذا كانت نوعا ما يعني لكن المرحلة التجربة الثانية فيما يخص المجسمات المقدمة كانت يعني نوعا ما أنجح من الأولى. والمشروع الأخير هو كان فيما يخص هذه البقعة كذلك يعني إعادة الرجوع للنمط الأصلي، وكيف يعني ممكن إحياؤه بدون يعني نوعا ما يعتبرها كذلك ناجحة كمحاولة لإعادة أو استعمال المراجع يعني الأصلية أو التاريخية قبل يعني في المشروع. وفيما يخص آخر كتاب هذا After Amnesia، فالآن هو يعني الكتاب لديه الكتاب على PDF. إذا في أي شخص يريد نسخة فممكن يتصل بالبروفيسور ويكون يعني جده يعني راح يبعث له نسخة من هذا الكتاب. يعني كتاب ممكن أنا إذا يسمح لي نقول عليه كلمتين. هو كتاب جد مهم يعني فيما يخص يعني سواء إبراز المدرسة الإيطالية، وكذلك يعني فيما يخص الأمثلة هي معظمها أمثلة من حول من مدن في المغرب خاصة الجزائر أو كذلك دمشق أو حلب. هذون كنماذج في مستعملة في الكتاب. Well, je ne sais pas. Vous voulez qu'on ouvre les débats?
Je suis prêt. Problème, avec plaisir.
نشوف إذا فيه يعني كيف ننظم أنفسنا فيما يخص الأسئلة. يعني إذا في يعني ممكن الآن إحنا أخذنا تقريبا ساعة، أكثر من ساعة ونص فيما يخص المحاضرة. مش عارف الأستاذ هادف كم بقينا من وقت وكيف ننظم أنفسنا؟ يعني هل ترى نجمع الأسئلة ونطرحها، أو يعني كل واحد يتطرق يسأل؟ لكن في الحالة هذه يعني من فضلكم يعني نكونوا يعني نمشي يعني للسؤال بدون يعني ما نحاول يعني نعمل كومنتس ولا محاضرة أخرى. فنبدأ إن شاء الله بالدكتور محمد فياض.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
وعليكم السلام.
طبعا بوجه الشكر الجزيل للبروفسور على هذه المحاضرة الغنية الحقيقة بالمعرفة، وأنا سأختصر يعني الأسئلة. أود السؤال فقط. طبعا حكى الدكتور البروفسور أنه عنده أكثر من 34 مؤلف في حقل التراث. أكيد طبعا عنده خبرة واسعة في عمليات الترميم وصيانة المدن التاريخية. سؤال: يا ترى هل يعتقد البروفيسور بأن صيانة هذه المدن التراثية وإعادة تأهيلها هي مسألة وطنية، أم هي مسألة دولية تسعى إليها المنظمات، طبعا المنظمات الدولية العاملة في حقل التراث الثقافي لكبح التعديات المتعلقة وإن كانت ناجمة عن حكومات لهذه المدن التاريخية؟ الشق الثاني من السؤال: ما هي أهم المؤسسات الثقافية العاملة في حقل ترميم خارطة المدن التاريخية، وكيف يتم التعامل مع البنى التحتية؟ أكيد كل المدن التاريخية بحاجة صيانة ويعني إعادة ترميم، وهذه البنى التحتية أكيد بتشكل مشكلة عويصة لهذه المدن التاريخية. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا. Bon, shall I translate this in English or in French, professeur?
As you like.
L'intervenant, il a constaté que vous avez 34 ouvrages. Ceci dénote votre savoir-faire et votre expertise. Toutefois, il a deux interrogations ou deux questions. La première est relative à la réhabilitation, dans le sens où sa question: que pensez-vous? Est-ce que cette réhabilitation est-elle, doit-on la considérer comme étant une action nationale ou une action qui est beaucoup plus dictée et guidée par des institutions et des organismes internationaux? C'est pour le premier volet. Le deuxième volet, il est relatif au rôle de ces principales institutions qui interviennent dans le domaine de la réhabilitation ou la restauration, et leur attitude vis-à-vis des infrastructures, des sites ou des tissus anciens.
Okay. About à propos de la réhabilitation, écoutez, moi je traduis réhabilitation, rehabilitation in English, qui est un peu différent de la réhabilitation française. Le mot recupero italien ça pourrait être traduit peut-être récupérer en français, non? Ça donne l'idée que la récupération, ça pourrait être fait soit par un maître d'ouvrage, c'est-à-dire un maçon, ou bien par une institution d'État, si vous voulez. Soit c'est la même chose aussi en italien avec les recupero. Donc, ce n'est pas lié à une idée d'échelle institutionnelle, ça dépend évidemment de l'échelle d'intervention. Le problème du rôle des institutions dans la récupération, c'est extrêmement compliqué. L'expérience que j'ai à propos des institutions qui travaillent dans la récupération, si vous voulez, du tissu urbain, je suis pessimiste, j'ai une mauvaise impression en général. Ça ne veut dire pas qu'il y a des institutions qui travaillent et qui s'occupent bien des centres historiques, etc. Le problème de centres historiques du point de vue politique, c'est un problème qui est associé aux problèmes sociaux et donc c'est le problème que ces quartiers sont habités par des gens qui sont pauvres et donc qui peuvent créer des problèmes, etc. Souvent, il y a un grand intérêt pour ce type de quartier parce que sont délabrés et donc l'intérêt des politiciens et des institutions se dirige plutôt vers des autres quartiers de la ville. Je suis en train de dire des choses très génériques, si vous voulez, je m'excuse. L'autre problème, c'est que récemment, c'est-à-dire il y a 10 ans, les institutions politiques ont découvert l'aspect touristique de villes historiques. Et en effet, les villes historiques exercent une attraction énorme sur le tourisme. Et donc, ils sont intéressés seulement à le revenu, c'est-à-dire l'argent qui vient du tourisme. Je ne suis pas contre le tourisme en principe, je suis contre un certain mécanisme de commercialisation totale du tourisme, qui en effet, c'est un grand danger pour le bien, évidemment. Prenez le cas de Venise. Dans le cas de Venise est considéré une sorte de banque, si vous voulez, de l'Italie, parce qu'il y a millions de Chinois qui se rendent là. Mais, disons, la situation de Venise est d'une certaine manière tragique, qui est bien représentée, par exemple, par les images que tout le monde a vues de grands bateaux énormes, comme des gratte-ciel, qui traversent le tissu délicat de canaux et de waterways de Venise. Et donc, qu'est-ce que je peux dire? Il faudrait commencer à faire une liste des institutions et voir quelles sont les attitudes et les attentions qui payent et comment ils travaillent. Évidemment, on ne peut pas éviter de travailler aussi avec les institutions, évidemment. Mais je préfère de travailler avec les gens d'une manière ou de l'autre, qui sont plus intéressés et plus responsables.
Right. في ما يخص يعني السؤال الاول انه انا اولا لازم في ناحيه الترجمه يعني فيما يخص ريابيليتاسيون او ريابيليتيشن ف ما يسمى هو بالنسبه لهم في ايطاليا يسموه دي ريكوبيرو أو récupération يعني إعادة استرجاع. يعني إذا أنا مش مخطئ في ترجمة الكلمة، وهذا فيما مش راجع أو مش متعلق للمؤسسات يعني الدولية أو إلى بل متعلق بكفاءة العمال المنخرطين أو المهتمين في هذا المجال فيما يخص المحافظة على التراث. وبالطبع هذا يعني كذلك يعني نوعا ما كان يعني لديه انعكاسات فيما يخص التأهيل هذا العمال في للتدخل في نسيج تاريخي. أما فيما يخص السؤال الثاني، السؤال يعني يعتبر نوعا ما معقد إلى حد ما، لأن أنه من جانب السياسيين يعني نظرة السياسيين أو أصحاب القرار اتجاه المراكز أو الأحياء هذه الهشة التاريخية والهشة في نفس الوقت، يعني لأن معظمها يعني طبقات اللي ساكنة في هذه الأحياء يعني ذات يعني من ذات الطبقات الاجتماعية يعني نوعا ما يعني مش ذات الدخل أو that we can call them as skilled labor. فهذا أصبح يعني نوعا ما خلاهم يعني ما كانش الأهمية من جانب القرارات يعني فيما يخص المحافظة. يعني بدأت المحافظة فيما يخص هذه الأحياء لما صبحت العلاقة ما بين تطوير السياحة أو اتجاه السواح أكثرهم نحو الأحياء العتيقة أو يعني فهذا اللي خلى يعني إعادة النظر أو إعادة إعطاء أهمية أكبر لتطوير السياحة. ونفس الشيء يعني أنه هذا شايفين أصحاب القرار شايفين هذا أكثرها من الجانب خلينا نقول الربح، مش من جانب يعني في الواقع مش الجانب الثقافي ك يعني ك لإبراز خلينا نقول قيم في هذا. و يعني ذكر كمثال البلدية البندقية أو مدينة البندقية في إيطاليا. Shall I proceed to another one? دكتور عبد المحسن فرحات.
أيوة، السلام عليكم. Thank you very much, Architect هادف, Dr. بوضياف, and thank you very, very much, Professor اتيلوبتروشيولى. Excellent lecture, very rich and very profound. There are a couple of points made by Dr. Ibrahim Abdelhalim, who died recently, in his analysis of the urban heritage in Arab countries in general and Cairo specifically. And I would like to know your opinion about them. The first one is non-physical and the second is physical. The non-physical point, he says that what we have in the heritage is not only a reservoir of wisdom in relation to adapting to climate, in relation to socio-cultural system, etc., but also a reservoir of innovation that has stopped for many reasons. And it's the job of today's architect, planner, etc., is to continue the course of innovation that has stopped, utilizing, of course, available contemporary knowledge. Now, the physical point, the second point, which is physical, is that in his analysis, in addition to what is known about the urban fabric of narrow streets, also broken streets in relation to vistas and important buildings, etc., that he found that there are groups of nuclei. Every nucleus is surrounded by subsidiary buildings in relation to it. So I don't know, how do you react to these 2 points? The third quick point is that in Qatar, the climate is hot, humid, not arid, humid. Not arid, hot, I'm sorry, not hot, arid. It's in Qatar, it's hot, humid. So the courtyard pattern is according to climatic analysis, is not the best pattern, unless there are other ways guaranteeing continuous natural ventilation. So I don't know what is your reaction to that. And again, I thank you very, very much for your lecture. Thank you.
Thank you for your interesting questions. Okay, question number one, non-physical. Of course, the old Romans had 2 words to define the city, urbs and civitas. Urbs was the physical city, okay, with the walls and everything. And civitas was the citizens, the social city. Of course, I practically separate the physical from the social, let's say, for practical reasons, because I'm an architect and I practice with the physical city, but I have very, very clear always and present that the city is inhabited by people. Absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes the physical city can be explained only with the intangible phenomena that occur in it. And sometimes the intangible is the real character of the city more than the monuments itself. When I gave an advice for the city of Salt that wanted to apply for the UNESCO World Heritage, and well, I suggested and I agree with them on the fact that the intangible fact that there are different religious community cohabiting in the same fabric, door to door, and they are collaborating and they are helping and so on. That is the most interesting thing, you know, and that is totally intangible. While, you know, at the first moment they wanted to show some or present some houses that 19th century, I mean, interesting, but nothing special. And they got it at the end, you know, because they pushed in this idea of the intangible city. As the intangible city, yes. The question of the nuclei that you mentioned, I don't know, unless you refer to the fact that the Islamic city in general is characterized by the presence of these nuclei, one next to the other, that at the beginning were corresponding to large families, you know, so the same blood. Later on, probably they are characterized more by the people with the same work. They share the profession and so on. And nowadays, in general, it doesn't exist anymore, this kind of strong link, connection of the people within the nucleus, but they are still there. And the last question of the humidity and Doha, it is true. The breeze is the most important thing, but they still had courtyards. The courtyards were larger to allow the breeze to go through, and quite interesting, you know, in the formation of the various parts, chronological formation of the various parts of the courtyard. While in our Mediterranean area, the first important part of the house faces southwest, you know, because there is a tradition connected to the agriculture. There it faces east. That means the breeze of the sea, you know, which is obvious. So this is a typical example of attention to the real problems of the reality, and real serious example of sustainability. Thank you.
دكتور بوضياف موجود دكتور؟ Je ne sais pas si le docteur Boudiaf est ici. Apparemment, il est présent, mais...
السالم, yes.
تفضل.
I'm seeing أنت رافع يدك. That's what I'm saying. يعني you want to say something? ولا
نعم أنا كان في قبلي شخصين.
إيه في الدكتور محمود دكتور محمود الشنديدي. دكتور محمود, can you hear us?
ممكن أسأل
if not we'll move to I'm sorry, Dr. شادي مراكة.
نعم السلام عليكم.
السلام.
أشكركم جميعا. أشكر البروفسور الإيطالي على الندوة وأشكر المنسقين. حقيقة أنا طالب دكتوراه. في عندي سؤال بسيط للبروفسور. أنا ممكن أتحدث باللغة الإنجليزية أو العربية كما تحبوا يعني. I can speak English or Arabic.
يعني أنا في الحالة هذه نفضل بالإنجليزية أنك تتصل معاه يعني ممكن باش يعني نتفادى ممكن يعني باش أنت توصل الفكرة بتاعك كما أنت يعني فاهمها يعني تفضل.
Okay, I would like to thank you all for this meeting. I would like to thank Professor Attilio for his valuable lecture. Actually, I'm a doctoral student in ENAU, Carthage University. My project is about spatial identity, about urban identity in Islamic historical cities, precisely in Hebron and Jerusalem. My question will be about my city, which is Hebron city. You know, Hebron city is a historical city. It's 5,000 years ago. So it started from Canaanite civilization, then Prophet Abraham, then Jewish civilization, which is just taken 80 years. Then the Romans, then the Christianity, then the Islamic civilization, from Khalifa Umar till the Umayya Abbasi, then the Christian invasion, then came Saladin, then the Mamluk, Ottomans, then the English colonization, till the Israeli invasion. I have seen in Professor lecture how he, analyzed the historical city. But the problem of Hebron city and Jerusalem city is more complicated actually. So we have got a lot of eras, we have got a lot of layers, and there are a lot of interventions, especially let's say religious and military invasions. So in this case, I would like to hear from the professor if I want to make a rehabilitation to Hebron city, which is an important city all over the world. What is the best choice to revitalize the city under an extreme force of Israeli invasion? And what is the best technique to connect the historical part with the urban extension? And how can we connect the identity from the past to the extension, which hasn't got the authenticity of the old city? You know, the globalization has, you know, I don't want to say erased our identity, but it makes a lot of problems, a lot of defects in our identity. So how can we work in such cases? How can we connect the present with the past? And how can we resist an extreme force which is trying to erase our identity? Thank you very much.
It's a very difficult question, and also very sad. If you are, if I can tell you something personal, I started to go with the students to bring missions of the students of the Polytechnic of Bari to Jerusalem, and we started in 2000 more or less. And at that time, it was the moment of the dialogue between Rabin and the Palestinians. It seemed that it was possible to establish a dialogue and so on. There was some optimism. We had first field work that ended up with the thesis of the students on the fabric of Jerusalem. And we had possibility of entering into the houses and surveying. So it was possible to make a quite interesting reading of the fabric, okay? So that was the first experience. And at that time, it was also possible to have architects, Israeli and Palestinian, talking about the possible rehabilitation of the city, etc. And then what happened that the dialogue finished. So we continue to go there and work and collaborate, getting the protection of various institutions, particularly the Palestinian institutions and the Turkish embassy at that time. There was a reasonable. It was possible still to work. Of course, in terms of reading and studying and analyzing, or maybe making proposals. And then this situation became worse and worse. And I went again, and we made a couple of projects in the land that belonged to the church. I mean, the Catholic Church. That means the valley of the Kedron and the shepherd field. Shepherd field is in the occupied area. Kedron is in Jerusalem. And that was again possible to make a project because simply it was in the land of the but the idea of working in the fabric in this moment is impossible because the Palestinians now are extremely suspicious and they don't even allow to enter in the houses, and they are right considering the situation. Israelis, they own the public spaces, and they don't allow any activity. This is unfortunately a typical case of disasters that occur when people tend to use history and to interpret history only in a very personal perspective, and not as a continuous process that belongs to everybody. Unfortunately, I don't have a reply for your question, dear professor, because I don't know how this situation will end. Now, you were talking of resistance. That is okay. It's important to preserve the proper identity that is at risk. Resistance is also that of studying as much as possible, to be aware, to know, to have the knowledge of the problem and the city and the fabric and so on and so forth. Hoping that this knowledge will, in a different moment, can be also applied to a project of the city, to the city. I'm terribly optimistic and very sad. I'm very sorry.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Dr. Mahmoud الشنديدي. دكتور ناجية سعيد.
أيوة، السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.
Thank you very much for this very informative lecture. I just want to seize the opportunity to, I don't know if you know about what's happening in Cairo recently. There is a big threat to the, the fabric of the, if we can call it necropolis, or what can we call, below the Mukattam hills. There are the historical cemeteries and mausoleums, and now the government is building flyovers, highways, and so on, and demolishing. Actually, it is said that about 27,000 tombs will be removed with this very unique architecture. And there is a national and international campaign to try and preserve, deflect this trend, and they have alternative routes to preserve this very unique heritage of Cairo. So I don't know if you know about this very, very sad situation and this crisis, and if anything can be done to stop this bulldozer approach that is threatening the character of Cairo. Thank you very much.
Well, this is another very sad story. I know very well, because on behalf of ICOMOS, I went 3 times for a mission to Cairo, and the situation is, in my opinion, of course, not as blocked as the Jerusalem. On the contrary, in a certain way, there is too much going on. But the situation is complicated, even by about the role of the institutions. There you have 2 2 institutions that have different master plans. Not with different, vision about the historic city, and they don't talk between themselves. And the position of the ICOMOS and UNESCO is very difficult in that case, because they they send people there to say not to do this, don't do that, don't do that, do this. But also recently there is an enormous pressure in terms of rehabilitating, but with the perspective of cheap tourism, you know. Therefore, entire quarters, neighborhoods are demolished and remade in a sort of Islamic fake style, something that is terrible, you know. How to stop all that, you know? Well, this is a case in which the institutions should understand, should acquire the evidence of what is happening in the old fabric. I mean, Cairo is incredible in terms of quantity of monuments, but also in terms of houses that have a high quality in terms of architecture and aesthetic. But the situation that's going on, I have seen lots of demolitions, lots of gaps created by the bulldozers and so on. And I'm not happy to go to Cairo, you know, because it's very sad.
Well,
I'm sorry that you don't want to come to Cairo anymore. What can we do?
what
You know,
Are the inhabitants
about the
of
role of the
Cairo?
international?
I'm very, very sad too.
exactly. It's not, it wouldn't be a vacation, let's say. If
Yeah.
I come, I will suffer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. What about the role of the international institutions and the organisms for the cases where they are, let's say, listed as a part of the heritage?
Yeah, there is a campaign with architects, archaeologists, and intellectuals, and we did sign petitions, and you know, but nobody is listening. Before, many years ago, when the pyramids area in Giza was threatened, we were able to make a stand. When the citadel was threatened, several times we made stands, but this time it is just the bulldozer is very, very rapid and very active, and nobody's listening.
You know, unfortunately, my impression is that decisions are in the hands of bureaucrats of the ministry or the municipality, and they don't listen. You're right. You know, they have a very simple idea about fabric. They see the fabric. They don't understand the fabric, basically. You know, they don't see the value and the quality of the fabric, and they tend to demolish. Period. They find a solution in demolition and reconstruction, and it's difficult it is difficult to stop them. You know, it's now, let's say a few words in a positive way. Otherwise, we end this session in a very depressed. Our role is also that of educating, and we have to continue to fight, to explain, try to convince of the value of the old fabric, also economical value, you know, and that's it.
دكتور بوضياف.
دكتور علي حيدر.
السلام عليكم.
تفضل.
تحية للحاضرين في على هذه المنصة الرائعة، وأحب أوجه سؤالي إلى الأستاذ بتروشيوليو، ولكن راح أستخدم الإنجليزية إذا ممكن.
تفضل.
نعم. Dr. Petrosciolio, thank you very much for your valuable. My question is, do you think that that the theory of typological classification of the urban fabric is comprehensive enough and general enough to describe objectively and explain all the cases of the Arabic Islamic cities? For example, we have I have another case, maybe unique case, which is the case of Mosul city, which is another sad story. Have another sad story because of its city of Mosul. Recently, Mosul city, of course, it is not. It is established. It was established before Islam. But Islamic principles, urban principles, reshaped the urban fabric of Mosul city. The main differentiation between the model of Mosul city is different from the general typology of the Islamic city by it have two congregational mosques, and the main point is that the market or the souks during some time in history go out the urban fabric, so it is on the boundary of the urban fabric. So my question is the theory of typological classification fit and applicable for all the models of Arabic Islamic cities, or it may be fit only for the traditional typological Islamic city where the congregational mosque is in the middle, then surrounded by the souks and others, and the residential fabric around it. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. No, you took an interesting point. Thank you. The theory was formulated by Saverio Muratori in the 50s, starting from Venice. And then the assistants of Saverio Muratori applied the theory to many Italian cities. And well, that's it. And I am the other generation, the younger generation, and I apply to the Islamic world. Yes, I reply yes, absolutely. It applies to the Islamic world for the simple reason that the theory essentially is a theory that says that you can retrieve the principles of the project that can be a project of restoration, project of rehabilitation, project of new architecture. You can retrieve the guidelines from the existing reality. So it's not something that we import from Italy. We import from Italy an approach to the reading, you know, that is general. But then what you find is local, and it's the local fabric that suggests the kind and the quality and the type of intervention. Okay, number one. Number two, as you know, Islamic cities are different one from the other, is sometimes very much beyond a certain similarity, okay, or continuous fabric and so on. But in general, there are profound differences. And the differences are due to the fact that all the various cultures and civilizations that joined Islam, you know, Turks, Persian, Arabs, Berbers, and not to mention the Indians, and so on and so forth, they had already formed in their mind and in their, we say, self-conscience, the idea of space, the idea of landscape, the idea of nature, of course, and the idea of architecture, okay? Islam didn't change that, only modified those costumes that were not coherent with the Sharia, but otherwise they allowed the people that joined Islam to continue with their mentality and their vision of the space, etc., etc. Therefore, you know, a Persian city will be different from an Algerian city. But we can read both of them because we don't want to change the reality. We want simply to make clear the reality that exists. The question of the congregational mosque that you said, you mentioned that is something peculiar that there are two congregational mosques in Mosul, but this is not really peculiar. Theoretically, every city in Islam has one congregational mosque, but in reality, every big community has a congregational mosque. In Tunis, there are 13 congregational mosques. Because you know there are many communities that arrived later, and they made their own congregational mosque. So it's not unusual.
Right, Professor. I've got another two questions from Dr. Abdul Fattah Mohammed. The first one is dealing with the impact of the high-rise buildings that they are developed nearby the historical centers. This one's. The second questions is asking about the, do you have, according to your experience, and do you have any tools or a methodology that you can suggest that it can be used, or we can consider it, let's say, to define the adequate questions, actions, sorry, on the historical centers that went through different, let's say, crises, mainly through wars.
Sorry, I didn't understand this.
The second one?
Yes, the second question.
The second one is asking if there is, in terms of methodology or in terms of techniques, that we can use them to define the type of reconstructions or restorations or rehabilitations for, let's say, the centers that they had been, for example, through war. Let's say, for example, the case of Aleppo or the case of Sana'a, for example.
Okay. The first question is very clear. No way that you can build tall skyscrapers next to the historical city and so on. These skyscrapers are exactly the opposite of the quality of the historical cities, that is made of human scale, density, yes, but reduced height of the buildings and so on, continuity of the fabric. Skyscrapers are objects, you know, surrounded by nothing, you know, normally a parking. And that they They destroy also the skyline, but that is not only that is not all the problem, and they create an incredible quantity of problems. So I'm against. Period. There's no way of establishing a possible dialogue by the two things. And whenever they are built, they really are disruptive. Disruptive because they bring traffic, disrupting because they are overwhelming the old historic fabric for so many reasons. Regarding the problem of Aleppo and the cities that are under stress, because of problems of crisis, I think that the typological approach that we are suggesting could be extremely interesting. To mention the case of Aleppo, in a certain way, what happened, that the war destroyed also part of the fabric of the ugly fabric made during the 50s. It particularly occurred along the highways that were cut into the fabric in the 50s, that are large, poor, cheap, building and so on and so forth. Well, applying the idea of the typological reading, we can rethink and redesign part of that fabric. We can even obliterate, eliminate those fabric of the 50s, that was purely commercial, cheap, and so on, and trying to reestablish the grain and the quality of the old fabric, reestablishing connections of the bazaar that was just cut by those avenues of the 50s that are not at the end so useful even for the traffic. Reestablishing a walkability of the city, a livability of the old city, that was lacking in those areas, for instance. So this is my way of thinking, that sometimes a crisis could be an occasion for an interesting, courageous that requires a lot of courage, reinterpretation of the city, eliminating mistakes, that have been done in the past.
دكتور أظن الوقت يداهمنا، بقى لنا حوالي 10 دقائق.
We've got another intervenant. I don't know. عندنا واحد حاب يتدخل إسلام. I think he will be the last one. أستاذ هادف.
Hello.
Yes.
Thank you for this invitation and this valuable presentation from Professor and all of you organizers. Actually, I have just one question regarding to.
ممكن تقدم نفسك إذا سمحت.
Yeah, sure. This is Islam, a PhD candidate at Heritage Preservation Program at Helwan University here in Egypt, Cairo. Well, actually, I want to ask you a question regarding to recently we have global initiative related to transforming cities into smart cities, especially for heritage cities. From your point of view, Professor Atelio, what is the impact if we transform an ancient city to be a smart city under term smart heritage city? Don't you believe that it could be impact negatively for authenticity of the cities, especially for ancient urban fabric? This is my question.
Okay, very interesting. First of all, I think we have to agree on the meaning of smart city. because under this smart city, now currently, particularly in the Gulf, there is a lot of commercialization, let's say what I call the commercialization of the sustainability, okay? Sustainability is a philosophy that also was applied in the past by the inhabitants of the traditional city or the inhabitants of the oasis. Okay, so spontaneously they knew what sustainable is. Nowadays, sustainability is a certificate that is given by a society to a building that guarantee that it is sustainable, or it is a product that is imported, I mean, from America, I don't know, from Singapore, to fix a problem in the building or in the city. And in general, these are products that are imported and they belong to a different philosophy and a different civilization even. They are just commercial products that create more problems of sustainability. And then, you know, the engineers will propose another product that will fix the problem created by the other product. So all this I hate, and I don't consider all that sustainable. In the same time, you know, smart city, if smart city is introducing innovating technologies and also innovating from traditional techniques of the past. I'm not on principle against. We have to agree. For instance, if you introduce the internet connection very fast in every house and so on, in such a way that those people have the possibility of being interconnected, that is positive. What is the problem? If you find a way of improving the quality of the system of climatization of those houses without demolishing and destroying or introducing incredible equipment, but on the contrary, trying also to learn from the past and introducing devices that you know, could improve the quality of the livability there. Why not? You know, we have to decide what is smart and what is not smart, and we have to be very careful because the consumerism is behind this idea of smart and tries to sell things that are often not useful at all, sometimes even dangerous. They are smuggling under the name of smart.
Right. Well, once again, thank you for your patience. Thank you, Professor, for giving us from your valuable time and for also feeding us, I will say. Before giving the floor to Mr. Salim to conclude, let me reiterate my thanks to all of you, and what can I say, take care, stay safe, and I hope that we will be in contact and we will see you again in the very next future, inshallah. The floor is yours, Mr. هادف.
ان شاء الله. شكرا دكتور. انا كان عندي سؤال او سؤالين للدكتور، معلش يعني راح اطرحهم رغم ان الوقت تجاوزنا. Je vais les poser en français parce qu'on n'a pas trop de temps. Professeur, vous avez parlé généralement des villes islamiques. Et à quel point vous pensez que que le modèle des villes islamiques est un modèle lié aux traditions millénaires des villes orientales. C'est d'un côté. Et d'un autre côté, vous avez parlé de la ville orthogonale romaine. Ne pensez-vous pas que les villes islamiques ont influencé l'Europe à un certain moment, surtout au Moyen Âge, ce qu'on appelle le Moyen Âge. Et il y a une chercheuse anglaise qui a parlé de l'influence de l'architecture islamique à travers les croisades, surtout sur l'architecture gothique. Ça, c'est ma deuxième question, brièvement. ممكن أترجم يعني أنا طرحت على الأستاذ ما هو مدى تأثير المدن القديمة على المدن الإسلامية من ناحية، وما هو تأثير المدن الإسلامية على المدن في أوروبا من ناحية أخرى.
C'est une question, je dois répondre.
Vous n'êtes pas obligé de répondre, si vous voulez.
Non, avec plaisir, bien sûr. Bon, sur la question disons, des villes orientales, évidemment, c'est disons, c'est un problème assez grand, assez large, etc. Et donc, c'est difficile de réduire le problème de la forme des villes orientales simplement à la forme géométrique d'une grille, si vous voulez, ou bien à la forme organique, etc. Non, il y a un article très intéressant, ville spontanée ou ville planifiée. Moi, j'écris dans mon livre soit planifié, soit spontané, c'est-à-dire que la ville s'accroît dans le temps de contributions de quartiers qui sont soit, disons, très, très spontanés, etc. Ça veut dire quand il y a des groupes et aussi des institutions qui ne sont pas intéressées à, disons, dessiner sur le terrain une structure avec une géométrie très forte, comme par exemple dans la ville ottomane ou bien souvent dans les villes arabes. Mais même dans les villes arabes, vous avez un moment dans lequel il a une intention plutôt forte de marquer le territoire. Alors, il y aura des quartiers qui sont assez réguliers. Peut-être pas terriblement, disons, géométriquement dessinés, mais assez régulières. Et donc, l'histoire est plus compliquée, mais pour ça, est aussi beaucoup plus fascinant, charmant, pardon. L'histoire de la ville orientale est vraiment charmante. Et bien sûr, sur ça, vous devez ajouter ce que je disais du fait de la autoconscience, hein, la formation de l'autoconscience sur l'espace et tout ça, la nature, etc., avec des contributions qui sont différentes et donc qui ont enrichi la ville orientale. Et donc, qui tout à fait est encore très peu étudié. Hein, enfin, il y a encore beaucoup de choses à voir, à comprendre. Absolument, il faut vraiment des travaux profonds sur la ville, de lecture, etc. Et ce qui sortent sont des informations, des choses extrêmement intéressantes. Et la deuxième question, j'ai oublié, je m'excuse.
Sur l'influence des villes islamiques sur l'architecture en Europe. L'architecture et l'urbanisme.
Donc, la chose est très intéressante, évidemment. Il y a des parts de l'Europe qui ont été influencés par la culture arabe, comme l'Espagne, la Sicile, qui a été occupée directement par les Arabes, donc qui ont laissé un front très très fort, très important, évidemment, et des autres qui sont, disons, qui a été occupé pour des périodes très, très, disons, pas importantes, comme l'Italie du Sud, la région Apulia dans laquelle je travaillais. Bon, il y a des régions comme les régions de la ex-Yougoslavie qui a été, disons, occupée longtemps par les Ottomans, qui ont laissé une empreinte très très forte, évidemment, sur la structure des villes des Balkans. Et donc, dans ce sens, c'est une influence importante. Mais je voudrais encore dire que tandis que l'histoire, les livres des histoires nous racontent une histoire de guerre entre... Vous écoutez encore, vous pouvez? Parce que... Alors,
oui, je vous écoute.
Ah, bah,
oui, il n'y a pas de problème.
Tandis, j'ai fini, hein. Tandis que les livres d'histoire nous racontent une histoire de guerre entre les deux parties de la Méditerranée, entre les musulmanes et les chrétiennes. Et il y a eu évidemment aussi des guerres, etc. Et l'histoire, disons, plus petite, qui s'occupe des gens, etc., nous raconte une histoire différente, c'est-à-dire une histoire des liaisons continues de commerce, etc., entre les deux comment dirais, les deux parts de la Méditerranée qui ont continué même pendant les guerres. Donc, c'est ça, ce sont ces liens qu'il faudrait renforcer aujourd'hui, etc., à travers la connaissance, parce que nous sommes des académiciens, c'est-à-dire nous sommes des gens de connaissances. C'est ça que nous pouvons faire et c'est ça que nous faisons.
Merci, professeur.
Merci à vous. Merci à vous.
J'ai le docteur Youssef Netcha, il a écrit sur Facebook, il vous passe le bonsoir. Il était directeur du tourisme et du patrimoine islamique à Al-Quds. Il se rappelle de vos visites à Al-Quds. Je vous passe le bonsoir. Et je laisse un petit mot au docteur Chendidi. Il a levé sa main et il n'a pas parlé. S'il veut parler, sinon on clôture. Mais rapidement. استاذ شنديدي اذا عندك مداخله سريعه تفضل، اذا ما عندك نغلق.
السلام عليكم، انا بشكركم جميعا، شكرا لاتاحه الفرصه مره اخرى للسؤال. I just would like to ask the last question. انت
هي كانت للدكتور شنديدي استاذ شادي.
معلش انا فكرت شادي، انا بعتذر، كل احترام.
طيب شكرا لك لانه انتهينا من الوقت. طيب اذا دونك جو في كلوتيري جو اكسكيوز بور اسف للاستاذ شادينا سوف لانه تجاوزنا 3 ساعات سوف اغلق يعني الجلسه هذه الندوه. نشكر جدا الدكتور البروفيسور اتيليو على حضوره وعلى سعة صدره. On remercie vivement le professeur Attilio pour sa présence et sa patience. الأسبوع المرة القادمة إن شاء الله سوف يكون الحديث عن الآثار والتراث الفلسطيني الثقافي في فلسطين في ظل الصراع. الدكتور حمدان طه المدير السابق للآثار بفلسطين، مدير الجلسة الدكتور يوسف نتشا مدير أوقاف القدس والسياحة السابق ومدير مركز دراسات القدس في جامعة القدس حاليا. Donc la prochaine fois ça sera on parlera de l'archéologie et de patrimoine culturel en Palestine sous le conflit. Merci encore professeur. شكرا للسادة الحضور، شكرا للجميع. نأسف أننا لم نستطع ترجمة لكل الحديث لأنه الوقت كان ضيق. شكرا وليلة سعيدة للجميع. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Bonsoir à tous et à la prochaine. Merci.
Merci. Merci.
Merci à vous.
Merci.
شكرا للجميع.
شكرا.
شكرا لكم.
يلا السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام. شكرا.